Good afternoon and welcome to our weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield News Anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
I have to say, for the first time in about a week and a half, there's sunshine here in Indiana, or at least it's trying. So it's hopefully a good sign of things to come for the month of May.
Absolutely. The weather's been a little tough for a lot of folks around the country as we look over the last week.
And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. To start off this week, Scott, let's review and recap what happened on the markets.
Yeah, so it's been a good week. When you look at livestock markets, I'll start on the cattle side. You look at fed cattle prices up more than $8 for the week. That did feed through in terms of cash markets for feeder cattle being 1 to 10 higher, with probably most of that happening at the higher end of the range. Feeder calves also steady to 8 higher for the week. So very, very good week. Fed cattle futures were also up significantly as we went through the week. Feeder cattle futures were fairly volatile. We ended the week about where we started the week in terms of futures for feeder cattle. Choice box beef prices up $11.40 relative to a week ago. That's the highest choice beef price we've had since September 11th of 2015, and when you look, we were up across the board on everything in terms of the components of that box beef. On the hog side as well, also a positive week, up about $3.50 for the week in terms of cash hogs. When we look at the pork cutout value, it was up a little more than $2 for the week, and again, across the board, all components of that pork cutout value were also higher.
When we look at a week like this and see some pretty solid numbers, what pushes and is driving the strength behind the markets?
Well, I think you can certainly look at the demand side of the picture for that strength. And I just remind us when you look, for example, at where fed cattle prices have gone here in the last few weeks, when you think back to mid-October when we were falling below $1 a pound for fed cattle, now sitting here at closer to $1.45, we haven't seen those prices in months. So it has been a very good run. It just reminds me how strong the demand pull, both domestically and internationally, has been.
And it's a good thing that there is strength in demand, because monthly trade data was released, and really pretty impressive numbers this week. Absolutely.
We got data for March out, and when you look at overall red meat and poultry exports, both volume and revenue was up double digits compared to a year ago. If you look just a little bit at that individual data, so all beef was up 24.7% relative to a year ago. That's the largest monthly volume of beef exports since June of 2014. Japan, South Korea, both very important markets in terms of growth in the last month. On the pork side, it's another very good month for pork, with all pork up 15% above a year ago. That's an all-time record volume. We continue to see the pork exports that are growing in front of us. Even when you look at broiler meat, up 11% relative to a year ago. It just was a very strong report that we got in terms of trade.
How important are those trade relationships? We talked a little bit about the NAFTA drama, and then, or we'll call it a roller coaster, the NAFTA roller coaster last week. But we look at relationships with other countries. You mentioned South Korea, Japan. How important is it going to be to get China into that mix as well, especially on the beef side?
Yeah, so I think it could be very important. All right, so we've gotten a lot of growth, and we talk about, in the case of beef, Mexico, South Korea, Japan. But if all of a sudden you have a China come in and become a significant importer of U.S. beef, the opportunity to continue to grow our exports in front of us probably hinges in large part on finding additional markets. And China's one where, again, 1.3 billion people, growing incomes. You have to think that they're interested in higher quality beef that the U.S. might be able to provide. And that's the next step for the beef industry. And I just keep saying, when you look at just the amount of our production that we export today across the different meat components, it just reminds you of how critical exports are going to be when you've got anywhere from 15 to 25% of domestic production that's going outside the country.
We were in Washington, D.C. This last week and had an opportunity to meet with Secretary Perdue, and he's fairly convinced that once the Chinese get a taste of the high-quality American beef, they're going to be return customers over and over and over again.
You have to really be optimistic about the opportunities that sit there in China. And again, I kind of come back and I go, realize they consume half the world's pork. If we just got a little bit of that in terms of beef gain in China, it would be a market mover for a period of time.
Speaking of markets and getting U.S. beef for the first time in 13 years, U.S. fresh beef was exported to Brazil. And it may not be big numbers right now, but does that also create opportunity for U.S. producers as well?
I think it does. So I think we're going to see pretty small quantities of beef headed to Brazil here for a period of time. But having just other market alternatives is important. I sometimes will come back and say the fact that we now have another market open to us, that we're starting to talk about how to keep markets open when we have these kinds of events like BSE in this country. And I think that's really critical, because as we talk about growth in exports in front of us, the thing we need to be most concerned about is that a market turns off because of something that happened. And if it was based on something other than sound science. So we may have some event that requires countries or countries decide they don't want to take product from us, but if it's not based on sound science, then we leave ourselves open to a lot more volatility in markets than otherwise is the case. So it's good to see Brazil now taking product from us. We can wrap back to China and say getting them to actually take product as well gets us beyond much of the problem we saw with BSE in this country.
While we're on the topic of demand, we talk about it globally. Domestic demand is equally as important. Some numbers late last week and then this week as well. Looking at the unemployment rate, as we see that continue to drop and jobs added to this country, does that give producers in markets a little positive reinforcement as well?
Absolutely, I think it does. When you look at the unemployment rate, 4.4%, the lowest level since May 2007, and we added a lot of jobs here this month. All of that tells me that you're going to take all consumers and have an opportunity for them to buy up. And when I say that, I think buy more higher quality meat, both beef and pork, provides some real opportunity for real domestic demand strength in front of us. The idea that I might go out and consume more products at restaurants. Those tend to be some of our higher value products. So I think when you look at the unemployment data that we have today, it just reminds us that the economy is continuing to get stronger right now. And that's nothing but good news when we have the growth in meat supplies that we do so far in 2017.
And May is National Beef Month as well. So I'd have to think, as weather is warming up, or should be warming up through most of the country, that can help us on the domestic demand side as well.
Absolutely. I think when you look at the seasonal side of this, we can see some strength coming as we talk about grilling season getting in full swing. And so we may not be done with these markets, although we certainly moved cattle markets particularly a lot here over the last couple of weeks.
Restaurant Performance Index came out last Friday, and we taped a day early. So as we take a look at those numbers, what are some of the things that we're watching and taking from this? And what does that number translate, or how does that number translate to markets and ultimately beef producers and profitability?
Yeah, so I think for a while we've been talking about a Restaurant Performance Index that has been getting stronger as we go month to month. One of the things that we talked about over that period of time, though, was it was kind of the expectations part of that index that was really causing the growth. The good news out of that report that talks about March is that the current situation, all right, we finally got it to be show some growth in March of 1.4%. The overall index up 1.8. It just starts to tell you that all that expectations we were talking about is coming to fruition when you look at what we got out of the March report. So for me, that's really good news to see. We have same store sales that are getting higher, and that being reflected in that current situation index tells me we're realizing some of the expectations that we thought were coming. So that really corresponds very nicely with the jobs report that we got out today as well. So it tells me domestic demand continues to get stronger for meat products.
Scott, as we wrap things up this week, I think we have to talk a little bit about the weather. It's massive flooding in parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, blizzards as you go further west. And we're looking at short-term losses. What does that mean for markets, or what potential impact could that have on livestock markets?
Yeah, so what an amazing week that we've been through as you go from west to east. Snow and rain and almost everything in between has certainly created some problems for us. It seems to me, when you look at what does this mean for markets here in the short run, number one, if you look at where we were feeding cattle, I think we've certainly seen weights that are going to come down as a result of some of the snow that we've got. It's a little harder still to get a handle on actual cattle losses. We know we had cattle losses in some of these feed yards. Getting an absolute perfect count at this point is a little tough, but it seems to me that kind of tightens the supply side here in the very short run. I assume that that'll be short-lived as we get beyond kind of the current situation, but I expect cattle weights to be lighter here for the next couple of weeks as we deal with some of that storm-related loss there. I go in the Midwest and I go a lot of rain. I don't know what that means as we think about crops. It's pretty early in the year. I can tell you our producers here in Missouri, I hear a lot more about replant that's going to have to take place, and we're probably several days away from being able to get back in the fields given all the rain that we've had. But it's a slower start, I guess, at this point now to plantings if we have to come back and do it twice now.
I had a farmer tell me today, not necessarily worried about having to replant or a slow start at the beginning of May. It's when he gets towards the middle and the end of the month when he starts thinking about switching his acres. So we'll have to see, I guess, how the next week into 10 days play out weather-wise, and see if these guys can get back in and get some corn in the ground. Yeah,
once we can get back in the fields, we know we can plant pretty quickly at this point. So again, it's too early, but certainly off to a tough start after what's happened here over the last several days.
Scott, anything else this week?
I think that's the major issues for the week, Megan.
Anything we're looking out for next week, or do we have a quiet week report-wise?
So we do get WASDE out next week. It comes out on Wednesday, and we'll actually see 2018 estimates for the first time from USDA in the WASDE report. Give us a little bit of stage for where they see both livestock and crop markets as we go into 2018. We'll get another round of consumer confidence out on Friday as well. So another little look at where consumer demand is. So those will be the big things that we'll be looking for next week.
All right, Scott, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next Friday.
Very good. You have a great weekend as well, Megan.
Thanks. To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, go to brownfieldagnews.com and click subscribe. You can also submit questions or comments if you have them. And make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute twice a day, also found on Brownfield TV at brownfieldagnews.com. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.